Let's get into the JavaScript now. First, as you can see, window.addEventListener, basically what that does is when the page loads, it calls upon the start function. Let's go down and take a look at the start function. Here's the start function. When the start function is run, you'll see two other functions being called upon. One of them is called the initializeBoard function, the other one's called the startState function. Let's first start off by looking at the initializeBoard function. First of all, what this does is it basically appends the 3 rows and 3 columns of this graphical interface, as you can see. I made this graphical interface to make it easier for me to actually test how my algorithm works. Let's see this. So first, the initializeBoard function is able to create the game environment using 2 nested loops. One of them here is to create 3 div rows that serve as containers for the rows or squares. So a div row, one div row, one div row. Below here, it essentially creates each of these squares within the rows. As you can see, this fills the 3 div rows as squares, and also when it's doing this, it puts the onClick handler for every one of the squares that it inputs within the row containers. So when a player clicks on it, it's going to give a callback. Last but not least, you essentially append the entire game environment that you have created above into the index.html page by writing the code row.appendChild _node. So while we're at this, let's take a look at the callback function, and this can be found essentially below. So when the player essentially clicks on one of these squares, what this is going to do is called the player input function. Basically, it checks a couple of things. First, it checks to see if the square is going to be blank. Then it checks to see if it is the player's turn. If both of these conditions are fulfilled, it is going to create an X image on the grid, as seen here. After this is done, the program is going to check to see if the game is over. So imagine if I were to put my X down when I already have 2 X's, then that would connect 3, which makes the game over. Then the algorithm is going to call the AI if the game, for example, is not over. Next, we'll be taking a look at what happens when the game is able to call the AI. Moving down to the algorithm select move. So this is essentially the entrance point for the AI. So here what the AI does is that when the AI is going to make a move, it's going to call upon the minimax algorithm.